The other thing that happened this summer, because the House had officially risen for the summer before they finished dealing with the budget bill. And here was a place where you'd like to think that with the BP oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, with the climate emergency across the country, one thing you would not want to do would be to take all energy projects and take them out of the environmental assessment regime, put them over into the regulators who tend to be much more favorable to the industry, and certainly even if they aren't and they're good and objective regulators like the NEB, they tend to have a focus on the technical aspects of the project and not the environmental aspects. They have not asked applicants to go through an analysis of the climate change impacts of their energy projects, the way the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency legislation works. So it's one of the, I think, one of the most egregious anti-democratic tragedies in the annals of environmental law that this government got away with sticking the gutting of the environmental assessment legislation into the budget implementation bill, and that the only committee of the Government of Canada and the Parliament of Canada that examined the implications of huge changes, not just to environmental assessment, to the sale of the nuclear industry, which I think good idea, but let's have some oversight on how that's carried out, changes to Canada Post, a wide range, hundreds and hundreds of pages of non-budgetary, non-fiscal matters were stuffed into the budget bill, and the only committee of the Parliament of Canada to examine that was the Finance Committee of the Senate. And even the Finance Committee of the Senate said, we should look at this and take those measures that are not fiscal and remove them. And that's when Stephen Harper appointed one more Conservative senator to ensure that between the Liberals, the Independents, and the Progressive Conservatives in the Senate of Canada, that would not pass. And so a bill of 800 pages, primarily non-fiscal matters, was passed, gutting our environmental assessment regime and making it much less likely that any future oil well in the Arctic or in the deep water of the Gulf of St. Lawrence or off the East Coast or off the coast of BC would get the assessment that it would clearly be demanded by the public who want to keep our coasts free from the oil spills that have ravaged from Exxon Valdez and BP Horizon. And we have less control now. We, by the way, from my home committee in Saanich Gulf Islands, we have a card, and I was told by one of my SGI team that on every table there's a card to the current Member of Parliament from my riding to urge that we take action to protect the BC coasts from tankers and from oil and gas, because BC is one of those places currently protected by a moratorium, but that moratorium must be legislated to make sure it protects our coastlines. Canada's lack of effective governance is in its own way a bigger crisis than any one of these matters pulled out by itself. You can look at what's just happened with the Ombudsman for Veterans Affairs. I saw those changes happening to veterans' benefits in the spring of 2006 and thought it was awful. And now we have someone speaking out on behalf of veterans, so of course he's fired. The fact that someone who's injured, loses a limb in Afghanistan and comes home to Canada cannot count on the same continuity of protection that my father's generation could in coming home from the Second World War. A lump sum payment is completely inappropriate for a young person coming home from a place that we have, as a country, sent some of our best and brightest and most dedicated youth. They need to know that if they come home with a significant injury that affects their ability to earn their living, that we don't pay them off once to save money. It's unspeakably vile, and that's something else that is being brought to light. The governance issues are huge in this country, and as I said, in their own way, they're worse than any one aspect of what's happening. Recently in the Toronto Star, Jim Travers referred to the current government's approach in terms of what it's doing to our institutions, and described it quite appropriately as vandalism. The current Government of Canada under Mr. Harper is committing vandalism against our institutions, damaging the very fabric of the notion of a fully functioning democracy where regulators know they have to have no fear of political interference. The way Linda Keane was so absolutely, it was one of those moments of high-handed autocratic behavior that should go down in Canadian history, as unacceptable. To fire the president of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission because she was following the law and not being willing to be browbeat into submission by the political masters. We in this country are enduring so many of these firings and changes and chilling effects through the bureaucracy. Our civil servants in federal level are so massively dispirited and depressed by the fact that they know if they speak out, they'll be fired. Scientific community, all the funding, every research penny for climate change science has been removed. And the climate change scientists within the government, as is the case for every employee of Environment Canada, has been told they can't answer a media question until they get the answer approved by the minister's office. It's so shocking. When that order first came out, and it was a couple of years ago now, the scientists in the meteorological office in downtown Toronto, Downsview, they track all kinds of things that one wouldn't think were politically sensitive. But as they saw a major blizzard bearing down on Toronto, they called Ottawa to see if they were allowed to warn Torontonians. That's how fearful people have become. The notion that they would say, well, they couldn't have meant that we can't warn people about blizzards. He said, no, we've been told we can't talk to the media at all till we clear what we're going to say. This is not the same country that I've known. We are seeing changes that are so deeply dangerous, and they are fundamental to the very fabric of our democracy, and we must not let that happen. The greatest award and distinction and honor that has ever been bestowed on me is the little lapel pin I have as an officer of the Order of Canada. And for me, the words of our national anthem are very personal. My friend Vicki Husband also was made a member of the Order of Canada. When she received her award, she said, you know, as someone who'd always protected forests and wilderness, she said, you know, I always feel that what we have to do is stand on guard. We stand on guard for Canada. We stand on guard for our forests and for our rivers. We stand on guard for our water, that it not be exported. We stand on guard for each other. But now I have this very profound sense that we must stand on guard for the very fabric of our democracy. We stand on guard. So, where does that position us now if we recognize these various threats to our institutions, to our future, to our economy, to our social safety nets? Where do we look now? One of my favorite authors, and forgive me for this, is an American humorist named James Thurber. I just love James Thurber. But he said, and I think it gives us a perspective, because there are certain emotions that don't help us. The worst one is despair. We must endeavor despair. Anger is a good motivator, but it's really not all that good at shaping moving forward. You need to stay focused on those energies that renew your spirit so that you don't ever give up. And James Thurber said, quote, "Let us not look back in anger or forward in fear, but look around in awareness." And that's where we are. We are not putting on rose-colored glasses that deny the evidence of the climate crisis in front of us, nor are we motivated by some sort of visceral hatred of this party or that. Frankly, I can work with anybody. This is a moment when we are fully aware, clear-eyed, and prepared for the challenges ahead. And this requires of us a certain moral courage. And fortunately, we've done a lot of our work. We've done our work. La Vision Verte offre une solution de rechange. La Vision Verte propose un message d'espoir. Nous sommes le parti de l'avenir. And we heard it last night from Don Drummond. Here's someone who, and it wasn't part of the introduction that we heard, he was Deputy Minister of Finance in many governments. He had to have those kind of head-to-head arguments with prime ministers who wanted to do things with budgets that he didn't think was a good idea. And in those days, civil servants could actually tell their political masters what they thought and not fear retribution, although sometimes it's uncomfortable. And here's someone who was able to stand in front of us, I was so proud, and say, look, your policies are comprehensive. He read through Vision Green, and he stood here to tell us that we deserved a B+, and all the other parties deserved an F because they were either too fearful or unprepared to even tell Canadians what their vision is.